Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and we are continuing on with our Healthcare Decisions Month. And today we've got a very important topic because everybody dies funeral planning rights and options. I have Dianna Repp here with me. She is with the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Arizona. I love the Funeral Consumers Alliance. You provide incredible information for people to know in advance of what they need to do, Dianna. So I am so grateful that you are here with us today. So thank you for being here. We do have an online audience that's watching from home along with an in-person audience. So I'm going to go ahead and put your PowerPoint up. If you are at home and you would like to ask a question, please put those questions or comments in the chat box, and I will have Dianna answer those at the end. So you should be all set to go, Dianna.
I have one question first, and that is about how long is the presentation? It's different times at different places.
So we usually go an hour for everything. So for questions and everything.
So with Q&A, all right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Because Everybody Dies, your funeral planning rights and options. My name is Dianna Repp, and I am with Funeral Consumers Alliance of Arizona. I currently sit on the board of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance as well. And I'm past president here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm very grateful to see you here. So this is not my cat, I can tell you that. But this is one of the favorite slides that people have here from our slide set. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. I started out in 1995 in graduate school, taking a course on death and dying across cultures and in cross-cultural perspective. And as I was sharing before the meeting began, it actually changed part of the course of my career. What I study are religion, so spirituality, art, and end-of-life issues. What gives meaning to our life? And that's really what started me to take a class on death and dying in cross-cultural perspective. So I hope that this is a meaningful topic for you and for those whom you'll be reaching out to, whether it's family or friends, as you think about all those choices you want to make at the end of your life. So what is the Funeral Consumers Alliance? Actually, we have been in the city of Tucson for decades, but still a lot of people don't know who we are. So I always put this slide in. We're a nonprofit objective source of information. And our goal is to help people make dignified, meaningful funeral, cremation, or burial arrangements. And this last line is so important, that are affordable and in line with your values. What are your ethics? What are your values? And how do you afford those things? And that's, again, is part of what drew me into FCA. So we're going to be looking at are the things that you must do. So there are some things legally that you can be doing. What is yours to decide about when you're looking at those end-of-life decisions, looking at after-death care for the body, whether it's for you or a loved one. Of course, we have a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, as we've already said, people who are online, please put your questions in the chat, and those will be given to me towards the end. There will be a time towards the middle for some questions. Ahead of time, I was asking people what they're interested in, and the thing that I heard was green burial, and that is a special interest of mine as well, so we'll be talking about that. So some things I'm going to touch on more than others. And I should ask, can you hear me in here?
Yes.
I'm trying to do the loud teacher voice now. So, and of course, our disclaimer is that we are not lawyers, and if you need specific legal advice, please do seek out professional legal help in these matters. We're here to give you some guidelines to help you along, and the things that we have learned at FCA nationally. And that's really important because the FTC, so that's the Federal Trade Commission, has been reviewing what's called the funeral rule in the last year and a half, and that has been very compelling, I'll put it that way, to see what's come out of this. So different types of things that you might be looking for. So our focus today are your rights when it comes to making arrangements for the body, whether it's your body or somebody else's, a loved one, someone that you are power of attorney for, and the options that you want to consider. Am I going too quickly? Am I speaking too quickly? No? Okay. Okay. So we'll start off with your rights as a consumer. And yes, you are a consumer. When I first heard of FCA, Funeral Consumers Alliance, I thought, well, doesn't that sound like a happy topic? I actually took my course on death and dying in cross-cultural perspective in the fall of 1995, and I remember thinking I could take a course on pilgrimage or I could take a course on death. Well, you know which one I chose. And it ended up, as I said before, giving a lot of meaning to my life in ways that I would not have imagined. And so again, I hope that will be true for you today, because you also are consumers of, as we've got here, after death care, goods and services. Your primary protection across the United States is the FTC and what's called the funeral rule. That's the short name for it. We'll talk about that some more. We're going to talk mostly about rights and resources within the state of Arizona. And I'll just give a pointer on where you could go to look somewhere else. And then we'll look at who's in charge and what are the kinds of options and choices that you have. So, your rights for the funeral rule. Again, Federal Trade Commission, this gets reviewed every 10 years. And I want to just point out what I've got here on the right. I had the good fortune back in, it's been over a decade now that I got to go up into Quebec to look at to be part of an international conference. So I was an attendee. And so these images that you're seeing here are actually from Canada. So this is one of the casket factories in Canada. They actually have cooperatives there for just about everything, which is really interesting. So I was able with the group to go and visit them. And I'm going to show you some slides from that trip as I go through here. And part of what I wanted to say is when you're looking at these aftercare goods and services, a lot of them are by just a few companies. They have a lot of smaller names, but they're, making a casket is making a casket. How much you pay for it can vary by thousands of dollars, oftentimes for the same product. So the FTC has several different rules, and those of you who have the PowerPoint slide set already printed out, you can see them there. These are the first 5. And these particular rules, the FTC funeral rules, started decades ago, and again, get reviewed every 10 years. But the first thing, the most important thing, is buy only the funeral arrangements that you want. When you go into a funeral home, they should be giving you, as you can see here for number 3, a written itemized price list when you visit the home. If you are calling for number 2, you should be able to get that information on the phone. These are your legal rights. The fourth one is a written casket price list before you see the actual caskets. That's why I have the caskets on here. A lot of times when you go into what is called the showroom, which is where they have the caskets for you to see, a lot of times what you're going to see are the more expensive ones. That makes sense to me because they want to show you their best. But you should look for that price list. It should be available to you. It is legally supposed to be available to you. A lot of times it's an addendum on that itemized price list when you visit a funeral home. But that way you can see all the different prices for caskets that are available from that particular funeral home. The other one, number 5, and a written outer burial container price list as well. So again, these are the things that when you go in, they're supposed to be giving you right away. One of the things, like I said, is what's called the GPL, the general price list. That's what we're calling here, this written itemized price list. I have gone in for research over the last decade and a half and telling them right up front, and local ones, I'm not going to say their name because they're good people, but I would go in and say, I'm doing this for research. I'm teaching a class on this, and I just need to ask some questions. And they still made sure before I left that I had a GPL, and that should always be something that you get, is a general price list. Some of the other important rules, so 6 through 10, you should receive a written statement after you decide what you want and before you pay. And it should be itemized. So it's a written statement that is itemized for everything that you're going to pay for, and you should know what that is. You should get an explanation in that written statement from the funeral home that describes legal cemetery or crematory requirements. Why is this important? Because in some places, when you're paying for a cremation, you're not actually paying for the cremation itself. You're paying for the funeral home end of it, and then the crematory charges another fee. And part of the reason for this is because they're separate entities, separate businesses, so the funeral home cannot charge you for something that's not their service. So they will be taking the body over there, but you would be charged separately. So make sure that you find that out. The next one, number 8, you can use an alternative container instead of a casket for cremation. And that's what you're seeing here. I did a practicum with my students many years ago. That's what the white box is at the top. The bottom box is just showing you what these cardboard containers look like. And I will just say this, these cardboard containers are important because whenever you have a cremation, the body legally has to be encased in something. It must be enclosed. You don't just put a body in. The last time I did this presentation, someone asked me, well, how do you know it's your person? And that's a really good question. That's the kind of thing that people ask. Well, how do we know whose ashes those are? Well, there are a lot of different safeguards for this, but one that's really important is everybody literally is enclosed. And sometimes if people do not want a viewing, or even if you do want a viewing, you can still ask for this cardboard container. I'm going to be a little personal here. Many years ago, my son died. He was our only child. It's been many years now. And I can tell you this, what I learned in my death and dying class that I took was so helpful to me because we didn't know anything like that was going to happen. But what I learned about grief and dying was so very important to me and helped. So when I went into that funeral home, I knew some of the things I wanted and some that I really didn't want. And one of the things that my son and I, and my husband, his father, were really important to us is the idea of green burial and trying to be ecologically sustainable. So what did we do? Again, I'm being a little personal here, but I have found people like to know a little bit more about personal stories. So what we did is we rented a casket. Yes, folks, you can rent a casket because he was going to be cremated. And why would we take a beautiful walnut casket? Because I wanted wood. So why would you take that and put it in a retort? Well, you can actually rent a casket. And I'm telling you that because there's a cardboard container inside it. That's where his body was. But they also had fabric, beautiful fabric on the inside of that. You would never have known there was a cardboard container there. And so his body was placed in there. It was a beautiful viewing. They told me at that particular funeral home that they reused caskets about 3 times. And then they actually would sell them at a discount to someone, I guess. So we got one of those 3 times. So you can do all kinds of things. These cardboard containers can be painted like we have up here. You can put drawings on it. A lot of times people will invite family members to put something on there to help send off their loved ones. So a lot of different things that you can do. And then number 10 is one that is important to a lot of people because you may not realize this, but embalming is not required in the United States. It is not a legal requirement. It may be that the funeral home that you are going to has it as their policy that they will not allow a body to be viewed without embalming, but it is not a legal requirement in the United States. And I will only say this much more about it, and that is Embalming requires a lot of different invasive procedures. I'm trying to be delicate here. So when you think about that, you may want to think twice about whether or not you wish to have either yourself embalmed or someone else. And if it is a choice that you want, of course, that's up to you. But just know that it is not a legal requirement in the United States. And that was one of the reasons that the funeral rule came about, is because so many people were being told that it was legal and that they had to have that done. And it can be expensive. So if that is an expense that you don't want to add on, you don't have to. There are a lot of different things that you can do for the body, including refrigeration. There are a lot of potential changes to the funeral rule that are coming. The biggest one is the top bullet, requiring funeral homes to post their complete price lists on their websites. There was a lot of contention about this last fall. I remember watching, it was 5 or 6 hours, it was several hours of the funeral rule, the FTC review of the funeral rule, and they had people who were funeral homes providers, they had people who were from Funeral Consumers Alliance and from several other organizations as well, all testifying about this. And one of the biggest things is to ask funeral homes to actually require them to post their complete price lists on their websites. That's something that doesn't get done all the time. Or they can be placed in part of a website that's really hard to see. But so many of us let our fingers do the walking, or you've got your smartphone that does the walking rather than going someplace else to go and visit funeral homes. So it can be really important to go and check ahead of time. Another thing that they are asking is to require funeral homes to disclose the true and complete cost of their cremation services. I've already gone over that a little bit with you, why that would be important, because they're not always disclosed because they're part of a separate business. And then the third thing is to clarify and rewrite consumer disclosures, such as declining embalming, purchasing simpler non-ceremonial services, etc. So there's a lot of different things that are part of this. These are just the main ones. Again, this was taking place last fall. It's actually been going on for a couple of years now. And no one knows when the final decisions are going to be made about these things, but know that the FTC has been looking out for this for a long, long time. Let's take a look at Arizona. So of course, the funeral rule is going to apply. Home funerals are allowed in the state of Arizona. Scattering ashes on private or public land is allowed. I'll talk about that a little bit. You have two other main sources here looking for rights and resources. One is the Arizona Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers, and they have this consumer guide to Arizona funerals, and it's online, and that is something you can access now. So always access that. You can search for, you can file complaints, you can just see some of the spectrum there. And we've got a note here about the legislature attempting to weaken consumer protection. Basically, what's coming up in the legislature is whether or not they're going to continue this Arizona Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers or not. So again, whether or not that will be continued on. And that would weaken, I think, consumer rights quite a bit in the state of Arizona if that is removed.
Excuse me, would you suggest that we write our congressmen or senators about how we feel about this legislation?
At this point, you could, yes. And the reason I'm saying at this point is because I'm not sure what the legislature is doing about it right at this moment. And that would be something to take a look at.
It would be a good time to send your
Yes, indeed.
thoughts on this issue.
Yes, thank you. One of the other things that I would suggest, you can go to the Funeral Consumers Alliance nationally as well and look for different legislation. But for example, when the funeral rule was being reviewed, they were looking for comments from people across the board in the United States. So if you are a person who likes to get actively involved, and it sounds like you are, thank you, that's something to do as well, because the FTC often asks for different comments. They have a portion of their website, because it is, of course, the Federal Trade Commission. So for people to have any kind of complaints about funeral homes, any kind of legislation, I mean, there's a lot of different places that you can go to for that. Thank you. I've just mentioned the Funeral Consumers Alliance a couple of times, so I'll just say one more time. Part of what we do is objective information. We have a statewide pricing survey just completed in 2023. I'm going to show you the results of that. And we do have e-zines and public presentations and newsletters and things like that. So I changed this up just for you today. I put this new slide in. What do Spider-Man and Voltaire have in common?
What did you say?
What do these two have in common besides they're both just handsome as can be?
Someone answered your question.
I'm
They
sorry.
both have an I in their name at least.
Ah, there you go. All right. That's right. So basically, there's a famous saying, and that saying is with great power comes great responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Voltaire is the one who originally said that. And this is a trick question because Spider-Man didn't say it. His uncle Ben, is the one who said it to him. And it's part of what encourages him to become Spider-Man. Someone else had this in the slide set because several of us use this. And I decided I was going to add Voltaire in there because I thought, well, you know, it's Voltaire. But the idea here is you have a lot of power. You have a lot of responsibility. You may not think about that power right now, but legally you have responsibilities and powers. We're going to go over those. And so think about those. You know, what it is that you have power over in your life and your responsibility and who you're going to choose to help with those responsibilities. That brings us to this slide. Who is in charge in the state of Arizona? Well, you are, as long as you're alive. We were talking about this earlier today, and that is, why are you here? And somebody said, because we're going to die. Well, please don't do it now. Wait at least a few hours, hopefully many, many years. But who's in charge? You are, as long as you are alive. And then there is, in the state of Arizona, so this is part of, again, policies that we have. So you can see on this side, we're looking at familial relations, except for number 2, which may or may not be a familial relation. So it starts out with your surviving spouse, unless you're legally separated or there's a pending petition for divorce or separation. And may that not be so for you. The next, let's say this is not something that you're interested in, or you don't have a spouse, or perhaps you have someone else that you're very interested in being the person who's your power of attorney. So you would have that person with the power of attorney for health care and or with the durable POA if specifically given this authority. So this is something legal that you can do. We'll talk about that in a minute. Why is this important? Because so many people may not make this choice. Maybe they are in an arrangement where they may not be legally separated yet, but they are in an arrangement with someone else, or perhaps there are other reasons why they are wanting to choose someone other than their family members. I'm sure some of you have those kinds of stories or know of those kinds of instances where people did not make these arrangements ahead of time, and then it was the next of kin who got to make those choices. I heard a story just a few weeks ago, again, about this, about who's allowed to come to the funeral and who's not, and who makes those choices. So again, please make your wishes known. Then we go down the list: parents of a minor child, looking at adult children, parents, siblings, grandchild, grandparent. So again, these are familial relations that you have. Let's go to the other side of the board, because a lot of us are now thinking about who else is left. Well, the first one is number 9, an adult who exhibited special care and concern for the dead person. And I would add here that that person, if is not legally already selected, that they would come forth and do they have the financial ability and are they able to make that decision for you? Can they take that responsibility? Remember, with great power is great responsibility. There could be a person who is acting, number 10, as the guardian of the person at the time of death. There could be any other person who has authority to dispose of the dead person's body. And I have the example here. It's a little bit small, but hopefully you can see it on your sheets. So if you're in the U.S. Military Reserve, the National Guard, or if you have completed a U.S. DoD, Department of Defense record of emergency data, that's DD 93, that is the person or the group who could be responsible for your arrangements. Number 12, if none of those can be located or is financially capable, it can be someone else who is willing. Like I said in number 9, it can be someone else who is willing to move forward. The Funeral Consumers Alliance nationally is going to be hosting a webinar in the next couple of months on indigent burial. So what happens when families are unable to pay? The term indigent itself is one that is a little bit fraught right now, but it is the legal term. So indigent, so you are unable to pay. And I'm not going to take a lot of this person's thunder who's going to be speaking, but I had the grace to be able to interview him, so the privilege. And he's from a little bit back east, and he was talking again to the FCA nationally about what happens with these different, with people who are unable to pay. What happens if their families cannot come forward or they have no family? So again, it depends on who it is, who you're able to have come forward. It can also be that you would have an indigent burial. And then number 13 is the State Department of Corrections if the prisoner is in custody. So a lot of different things. The state has tried to look at lots of different scenarios for you as to who could be in charge. This is what I mentioned earlier. This is for illustration purposes only. So this is from the Arizona Attorney General's Healthcare Power of Attorney document. And so I have highlighted here, my agent will make all funeral and burial decisions. So if you want to designate this and designate who that agent is, there is a way to do this in the state of Arizona. So many of us are from other places here in the state of Arizona, or we come from someplace else. It's one of the reasons why I asked, how many of you are from here? I've been here over 40 years, so I'm almost from here. Although I'm definitely a lot more than 40, so I was from somewhere else for a while. Or maybe you have family members who still live somewhere else or have moved somewhere else. So a good resource for this, and this is just something we want to bring out to people, is to use Google. Of course, now you could probably do something with AI, but I think Google works well for this. Who has the right to make funeral arrangements in whatever that state is, and it's nolo.com. We do not support. We at the Funeral Consumers Alliance are not supporting any particular organization that we're showing, just giving you some ideas, but nolo.com is a good place to go on the web to find information about things like this. So who can make those funeral arrangements for you? So you might want to look at that ahead of time. So, what do you think? Is it legal to scatter ashes?
Yes.
Of course, if you have the PowerPoint, you already know it's down there. Yes, you can scatter ashes on public property. You may need a permit depending on zoning. And I would suggest that you always ask ahead of time and ask for a couple of different things, especially here. We live in a state with a large population of different groups. And there are some groups, if you're looking, for example, on tribal lands, where they're not really comfortable having people scattering ashes. When I was teaching, I would have students who were Native American students who were not allowed to be around cremated remains. And I would bring my son's cremated remains in because I wanted him to get to college somehow. So there you have it. So I would bring them in. All right, it was funnier in my head. Okay. But I would bring the cremated remains in, and one of the things that I would do when I was going to have students come in, I would actually announce to my students ahead of time, I'm going to bring in cremated remains. And sometimes they would not come, or they'd sit in the back of the class. If they were actually still in my office, I could meet them somewhere else. But I think we just want to be really respectful with this, and I'm sure people do wish to be respectful. So you might want to be, look carefully about that. So again, you may need a permit depending on zoning, but also just be respectful of where you are. What about this? The shoreline? We don't have this in the state of Arizona. What can I say? But imagine you were a place with an ocean, a larger body of water. So 3 miles from the shore, you notify the EPA within 30 days of the scattering. So yes, you can do the scattering first, make sure you are 3 miles out. And a lot of times there are, especially if you're by, the oceans, you can charter boats, and sometimes boats are actually already set up for this purpose. So they may bring several people out at the same time. You could be part of a group where people are scattering remains in the ocean. So afterwards is when you need to tell the EPA that you did that. How about this? Fireworks. Please do not do this in the state of Arizona, but you can put 2 tablespoons of ashes in for them to go up into the sky, because once cremated, the final disposition of human remains has been carried out. And so, yes, you can do all kinds of things. How many of you have heard about the diamond rings that you can make diamonds out of them? So there's definitely that, sort of like a cubic zirconia. Something that I've seen a lot of actually goes back over 100 years, and that's looking at the kind of jewelry that Victorians had. So they would have vials, so like VIAL, vials, small containers where they would put some ashes and you could wear them. Beautiful designs. I have a ring that you can put a tiny amount of ashes in. Sometimes what I've seen is people taking them to a glass maker and having them put in a glass globe. You can also have them placed into pottery of different kinds. So lots of different things that you can do with cremated remains. So I'm looking at where we're going here. How are you feeling, folks? Do you want to take a moment to breathe? Remember, the very first breath we have when we come out is that breath in. And then that very last time is that breath out. So breathing in and breathing out. Thank you for being here. Some of our most well-known options: direct cremation, direct burial. Maybe it's a simple funeral. Maybe it's an elaborate funeral. People have lots of different things they want done. Maybe you want different kinds of memorial activities. After our son passed away, we had 2 different services because my family was back in Illinois, and a nephew of mine was going to, I'm being recorded. Let's just say that he was going to spend money that I think instead I thought, we'll just go there. All the family was there. So we held a second service a week later in Illinois. And that was not done several years ago. Now I think it's pretty common. Plus it was just good to be with them. So memorial activities. In a lot of cultures around the world, these memorial activities become part of the rituals of the community. And they are enshrined as rituals that are religious in nature or spiritual in nature, and they're also cultural in nature. Things like visiting a cemetery once a year. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Yes.
Visiting a cemetery once a year, cleaning it off, having a dinner there or a lunch. Many years ago, I had the privilege of being at one of the cemeteries. I was asked to, believe it or not, there was a contest on Dia de los Muertos decorations, so I got to be one of the judges. And one of the most interesting things was seeing pizza. There were people bringing boxes of pizza. But if that's what your loved one loved and you like it, why not? Just bring those in and have a little dinner. I had a TA many years ago who was Buddhist, and she was talking about every year there's a particular ceremony that they hold where everybody goes to the ancestral area of their local cemetery, and they are all remembering their relatives, and they're all bowing and saying their thank yous and their remembrances. So you remember your families. Of course, there are streaming funeral and memorial services. The FCA National is also going to be hosting, probably in July, someone who does this professionally, this being streaming services and online memorials, and he's going to give a lot of pointers on those. So I will tell you, again, I got a chance to interview him. The pointer that I thought was one of the best that he said is make these separate services. If you're going to have something that's in person as well as online, hold online first, just to give people a chance to talk, and then hold the in-person separate. You can stream if you want whatever is being done in person, but he said it's good to have those two be separate because a lot of times it's hard to interact and engage in both of those areas at the same time. And I think that's true. If you're going to do streaming services or memorials, remember to ask for an itemized price list of options. And also, if possible, see if they have any examples. Not to gawk at other people, of course, but to get a chance to see what are some of the things that people have done. You might get ideas from them. If they have a list, that can be really useful for people. But wait, there's more. Wouldn't you know? And we're going to talk about these in the coming slides. So the first one is organ tissue and whole body donation. I talk to a lot of people who say, well, I already have that set up. It's not going to cost anything. And while that may indeed be true, and I think it's a lovely option for a lot of people, but also realize that there are times when you may have made these arrangements, but if something happens that you're no longer eligible, something happens to your bodies, a lot of different things that can happen, know that may change. So you want to be really careful, I would say have a plan B in mind for something like this. Again, we're not suggesting that you use any one of these in particular, but just to give you an idea, there are so many out here, so many different places where you can go. And there's a big difference between disarticulated parts, where they might use parts of things, compared to a whole body donation. And then, of course, there's the organ donation itself. So what a lovely way to give that gift of life to people. Green burial, the one that people, yes?
This cornea donation, is that age related?
That I don't know for sure, honestly. I wish I could. I do not have all the answers up here. And if anybody else in here knows that, I'm looking over here at your people. That would be something, yes?
Certain organs, if you age, you can age out of donating them. You don't give a 67-year-old kidney to a child. So you age out of certain organs. They always can use skin, and they can always use corneas.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to gently say some of that. The other thing I was trying to gently say is, for example, if you're in an accident, something could happen to your body and it might not be in the condition that you thought it would be. How's that? But thank you for what you said. I'm just going to move away from that. We'll go to green burial now. So Green Burial Council is probably one of the foremost places in the United States that's a clearinghouse for information, but there really isn't any specific group that actually has policies like the Federal Trade Commission would. So be careful, do your due diligence and homework in these. So when you're looking at green burial, part of what you're talking about is minimal environmental impact. A lot of times it aids in the conservation of natural resources, a reduction of carbon emissions. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Protecting worker health, restoration or preservation of habitat. That's what got me interested initially. That and the fact that I think we all want to tread more lightly on the earth. When you look at some green burials, they are actually conservation areas as well, because once a body is placed into the ground, then basically there's not a lot else that can be done with it, so it can become a conservation area. And that's, I'm thinking of some of the places back east where those cemeteries, those green burial plots were specifically created with that in mind. The image at the top is actually from Tucson. That is a wool shroud created by a local company. And the one at the bottom is one that I would really love, and that's a wicker casket. But I don't think I'll ever have one. And the reason is, when you're looking at the reduction of carbon emissions, as lovely as some of these ideas are, and I really think that ecologically sustainable burial is important, what you need to look at is the carbon footprint. How much gas does it take to move, for example, that wicker casket from the East Coast, or some of them are made in England, and to be brought here to where I am? Many years ago, I was at a Funeral Consumers Alliance conference, and one of the things we did was look at a local program. This was, I believe, in the state of New York. And what was so great about it is that there were people who were in a program. They were using locally sourced wood. A lot of it was wood that had other purposes first. And they were creating local caskets for local people with that. So locally sourced, locally made, funding was local. And then there's not a lot of transport that went along with that. So again, think about things like that. When you're looking at caskets and other things, what is the cost, the full cost environmentally for these different things that you're planning on doing? This is a set of images, these two that I put in for us today. So online, folks, take a look. What will be on everybody's left and then everybody's right. So this is green burial in Minnesota, 1 week after the burial. I think, how many of you have been back in the Midwest somewhere? What do they have that we don't? Rain, trees, all kinds of lovely things, winning teams. There's all kinds of things that they've got. I'm thinking of my husband with the Bears. He loved the Bears. And the Chicago Bears, what can I say? We're being recorded. But he loves them anyway. Look at this, 1 week after burial. That was astounding. I did a practicum with students back in 2015. 2014. I looked this up over the weekend to put this slide in. That is 3 months after the burial. It looks almost like the day that we dug that. And no, we did not put a real person in there. It was a proxy. But I was showing my death and dying and cross-culture students about ecologically sustainable burial and about different aspects of that. I'm not going to get into all of that today. But one of the things we did was look at it. Where do you think the body is? Well, it's not a real body. Yeah, I know. But where the body is, let me see, does this thing work? I'm just going to point to it with this. This is where the body is. This is not where the body is. When you're looking here in the Southwest, part of what you want to do is have this area. This is where the water would come down. It's up high, so this is on close to a hillside, and so the water comes down and it's going to stop here. The body is in here, and this is where you would put, next to this is where you would put bushes and trees and things like that. Again, a whole lot more that goes along with this, but I wanted you to see those slides. Just when you're thinking about what's ecologically sustainable for your area, it's going to be different in different parts of the world and different parts of the United States even. Looking at the National Home Funeral Alliance for home funerals. Nice quote here from the National Home Funeral Alliance. People used to always do this. This is what people did around the world. It's what most people still do around the world, and that is that you take care of your loved ones yourself. or maybe someone else is taking care of them, but they're people that you know. When my eldest sister died several years ago, I had the honor and the privilege, and I mean that sincerely, the honor and the privilege of helping to prepare her body with the hospice nurse. Thank you, hospice people. That I flew in from here, actually, back to the Chicago area, and the grace of it all was that some of the last hands that touched her body before she left home to go to the funeral home were family, were me. And I was so grateful to be able to do that, to help prepare. When we're talking about home funerals, you don't have to do the whole thing at home, although in the state of Arizona, you most certainly can. There are some guidelines and rules that you need to follow, but you can definitely do that here. But you can also do parts of it just like I did in Illinois. Maybe you just want to help prepare some things. But being able to do that for your loved one is an act of care. Also now legal in Arizona, I'm looking at our time, being mindful for all of you. These are the two that I mentioned earlier, alkaline hydrolysis and NOR, natural organic reduction. And I did put these notes on here for you because I knew you'd have them taking something home, so I wanted you to see that. Sometimes AH is known as aquamation, water cremation, resination. There's a whole lot of different names for them, but it's actually alkaline hydrolysis. Okay, so that's the actual name for it. Solution is 95% water, and it's 5% of usually one of two things, potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide. Depending on your provider, they're going to heat up. So the body goes into the cylinder. You can see a cylinder there on the right. So the body is placed in the cylinder with this liquid. It's heated to 300 or 350 degrees. I've read different things from different providers. It's all under pressure. And basically what this does is help liquefy the body. There are large bone fragments left. They get put through, one of the brand names. I'll just call it a cremator. So basically it's something that will make these into finer ash, just like when a person goes into a regular retort for cremation, there are larger bones left and they get ground up smaller. And so that's what happens there. And most of what was there is liquid, and that liquid is considered sterile. So this is one of the things that I personally have been really excited to see in the state of Arizona, legalized last year. Again, Arizona is a leader in these kinds of things in three ways: in alkaline hydrolysis, in natural organic reduction, and also this is the Advanced Care Directive Month. And so looking at how you can put advanced care directives online in the state of Arizona for free, which you cannot do in all states in the US in the same way. They make it very easy here in the state of Arizona. So you can see licensing requirements. We used to have this slide say almost but not yet, but they are both legal now. The real question is, when will facilities be licensed and up and running? But these are now legal in the state of Arizona. And again, just this month, natural organic reduction, a lot of people call it human composting. Again, it's what happens to bodies. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and this is what happens to most bodies. The body goes into the earth and it naturally biodegrades, just like everything else that's underneath the surface. So you keep the cylinder interior between 130 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. There are other things that get placed in that cylinder. Some places, depends on who you're talking to, which company, whether they're rotating or whether they're allowing air, because you want to aerate the body and the other materials that are in there, so that you end up with compost. And depending on the company that you're using, can be up to a couple of months. I don't want to give any specifics here because, again, it depends on the company. And again, that bill, HB 2081, April 2024. So this has just happened here in this state. I was really, for you folks, I can come in here and say, boy, I'm really excited about this. Most people I tell this to, of course, they know me, but what can I say? I have been in restaurants before I remember once where some people actually got up and moved. So you got to be careful who you're talking to about this. So thank you for listening. Getting creative has a long history, and I'm looking at our time to be mindful. So I'm just going to say people have found ways to connect with their loved ones across time and space. This is from when I was taking a study abroad group to Ireland. And what's so beautiful about this, these are two cemeteries, is underneath it says died in the USA. Those bodies didn't come home, obviously, but they wanted to keep those families together. They keep the names together, and they continued to add more names on there. And that's what we do. We remember them. Creative memorials, another day. I'm looking at questions. I'm just going to do the last part of this, and then I'll open it up for questions. Yes, I'm sorry.
What does Desmond Tutu have to do with
Yes.
alkaline hydrolysis? You have a photo of him, Desmond Tutu, back.
Back there,
Yes.
because I'm sorry, I was getting carried away talking about it because it's new here. Thank you, because he chose alkaline hydrolysis. So thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
What can I say? I go too quick. Thank you for mentioning that. So question for you, how much does a direct cremation cost in central Arizona? Yes, you had a question too? B. You think B? Okay, so we're going to do that thing like they do on the TV. So how many people say A? Did anybody here say A? Anybody 750? You got 750 over here. Anybody here say 1225? We got 1225. We got 1225 over here. Was 1225?
C.
Anybody here say C? 34. Oh, 3400 over here. Anybody here say 4000? Stay tuned. The answer is coming up. Be a savvy consumer. You need to make a plan. Avoid making a distressed purchase. Avoid information asymmetry. I just like that phrase, Sounds so nice. Information asymmetry. It basically means they know more than you do. You want to go in having done your due diligence, knowing as much as you can, and making a plan so you can control the cost. However much money you want to spend on your loved one is how much money you wish to spend on them. I will tell you one more thing about my son, and that is, so he's never been in one of those boxes. And one of my students up at ASU asked me once, well, why don't you have a cremation box? And they were saying things like, Dr. Repp is just, she's still grieving her son. And I'm thinking, well, yes. But what I said to them was, I've never found anything beautiful enough to hold him. Yeah, doesn't that sound like a mom? Because I am. Control the cost. It wouldn't matter how much it costs. Well, within reason. But last thing is pre-planning versus prepaying. So make a plan, understand those costs, and shop around. It's really hard to shop around when you are actually in the midst of it all. That's why I'm so glad you're here now. Think about this now. What do you want to have done? Use those cost comparison tools. And we're going to go over these, so I'm just going to go quick. Federal Trade Commission tells you to compare prices and decide on a casket and funeral home. There is a wide variation. Our price comparison, the latest one is from 2023. And you have this. I put it separately for you. So cremation and direct burial prices wouldn't include a private family viewing because they're direct. You're not witnessing the cremation. You're not using a mortuary chapel, but you may do a lot. I've seen some really lovely services that are outdoors, or some of them in someone's favorite place, which just happened to be a place of alcohol. But lots of different places that you could go. We don't call them bars anymore. I don't know what you call them. Place where you go and imbibe. You're not going to have flowers. You're not going to have clergy fees. You're not going to have all these things because it's direct. You're not going to have any of these niches, etc., because it's direct. One of the things to know is that there's something called a non-declinable fee. And so when you go into a funeral home, there's going to be an extra fee. And that fee is the non-declinable fee. And it covers their overhead. How do they pay the electric bills and everything else? So they have a non-declinable fee. On the full service side, full funeral side, the prices still don't include a burial plot, opening or closing the grave, grave liner or vault, marker or headstone. And that's important to know because a lot of people say, well, $7,000 or $8,000 or whatever it is, that's okay. But unless you're doing something where you're not going to have any kind of disposition, in other words, if you're going to use a cemetery, understand that that will be on top. Even if you're just going to have something that's placed, your urn is placed somewhere, there's an expense for that. And that's what we've got here, buying only what you want. That's the same thing as before. So take a look at this. This is the slide I wanted us to see. Prices charged by funeral homes. So again, those A, B, or C, it was all three. You find all three of those prices. To me, it's always amazing. This is not a touch screen. So we're here in Southern Arizona. Direct cremation, $670 to $2,900. So what we do at the Funeral Consumers Alliance is every 2 years or so, depending on staffing and volunteers, we talk to every funeral home in the state of Arizona, and we divide them by regions. And we ask them for exactly what you have seen on your sheet earlier. This is what we found, $670 to $2,900. Direct burial, again, it's not the cost of the grave, $1,100 or $1,165 to a little over $5,000. The same amount. Maybe you like the looks of someplace better than another, and maybe it will be worth it for you. But know that there are going to be different prices. And then, of course, for a full funeral, $3,035 to over $8,000. It's the same things that we're asking for. Again, maybe you like the look of a place better, but a lot of times these are things that are just very separated out from what it is that you're looking for, the ambiance that you're looking for. Buy only what you want, where you want. One of the things I wanted to take out of this is alternatives to newspaper obituaries. The Military Times is partnering with legacy.com. I remember when this was happening. What a lovely idea for them to do this, grateful. We all want to thank our military, the people who have served our country. And so Military Times is partnering with legacy.com. So they have a free option. There are things that you could pay for, but what a great idea, for people to be able to do that online. And this, by the way, on the right is here in Southern Arizona, in Marana. Which of the following sell caskets? Well, that's right. You know the answer is not. The answer is always going to be all of them. That's right. It's A, B, and C. Pay in advance, or rather plan in advance, don't pay in advance. I just saw an article in the last couple of days. I'm not going to tell you which of the big news outlets it was, talking about this very thing. Do not do the pay in advance unless you really research it first. You can see a lot of things get required. But what is actually something that you would be able to take care of yourself? And that is you taking care of the finances on your own and to make sure that you know where the money is going. So read those contracts very carefully. According to the research that I was just reading, some funeral homes will get 30% of their income from these pre-pay options. So again, look them over very carefully. Okay. Lots of different ways that you can cover the cost here. And again, these are things, since you have it, you can read. One of the things that I would say on here is when you're looking, again, at payable on death accounts, be careful, make sure that you have those things written up properly. Do you have life insurance or not? And is that something that can be accessed right away? You could join a memorial society, of course. And places like ours, the Funeral Consumers Alliance, basically part of what we do is give information. We do not give finances. We give information to people. And I'm so glad you're here. Talk it over and write it down. And this is what I wanted to end with, to document your end-of-life care wishes, because, again, this is that month for us in the state of Arizona. So looking at this Arizona Healthcare Directives Registry, what a wonderful thing that we have here in the state of Arizona. When you sign up for this and you register, one of the things you get is a card. And I'm glad, sometimes I will actually show my card to people. What's nice is it has a QR code. So if something happens to you and you're unable to speak, the healthcare providers, EMTs or whoever it is, they can scan that QR code and they can see your advanced care directives at a glance. It's a really great thing that the state of Arizona is doing. So thank you, state of Arizona. Resources we have available. And thank you very much. And any questions? And I realize I will be online questions. Okay. And thank you all for your time today.
So, so thanks so much, Dianna. You gave a lot of information for people to think about, and I know it's just so important. What advice do you have for discussing the topic with your loved ones? I know it is so hard for people to actually sit down and really converse about this. Do you have any advice on how you can maybe broach the topic?
It's a good question, and one that gets asked a lot. Sometimes people want to do this once a year. I've often heard Thanksgiving, which I thought was an interesting time of the year, but people are together. And so it's something that people will do as towards the end of the Thanksgiving meal is have a time where people might make that discussion. There are several different books that are available. There's even cards that are available, like a card deck that's available that people can have these questions. You have questions to ask each other. You could also look at, for example, the 5 wishes. There are things that are called ethical wills. I don't know if any of you in here have heard of an ethical will before, but instead of it being a will that's talking about what happens to your body, it's talking about what are your values, what are the things that you want people to remember. And so you're writing those down and talking to people about them ahead of time as well. So there are resources.
There are, and we've had an ethical wills class, a workshop here before. We didn't do it this year, but we did last year, and it's great. It's a great way to document. We have the 5 wishes available here at TMC for seniors, and we also have people who are available to help you, just go through that process because sometimes it's difficult and you have questions along the way. So people can always call us for that. Are there? It's such an emotional decision, right? When you're making these, when you're making your plans, are there common scams that are targeting loved ones, as after somebody passes? Is there a way to prevent any of that so that you're not exposed to those scams?
That's a really good question, and I would suggest that you look at the Veterans Affairs website. The VA has a section on that for veterans specifically, and I think that's a really important one. I think you're talking more generally, but I wanted to bring that one up to people's attention.
Okay.
I think that's really important. And yes, there are scams. I think one of the most important things is who you're giving your information to. And I think we know that, but when we're in the midst of grief, to think about who you're giving social security numbers to, even the date of birth and the date of death. One of the things that happens, unfortunately, is when people have died, sometimes their loved ones get contacted to find out that other people are using their identity. So you might want to be careful about things like that as well, looking at who has that information available and how much you're putting online. And of course, if you're going to go away, please don't put it on Facebook.
And if you can just let everyone know if they're interested in learning more about the Funeral Consumers Alliance, what is your website?
It would be, let me take a look here. I've got this here. So fcaaz.org.
Okay, so fcaaz.org. If people are interested in getting more information, I know you have a small membership fee for the year, but you do have some great information to provide to people about the costs associated, which is really important, and where they can, some options for them, so they can make some informed decisions. So, Dianna,
Yes. to that, and that is whether you become a member or not. Who knows if they'll keep me as a member now? Whether you become a member or not, go to our website. See the information that's there. You can access what I showed you as far as those 2023 price comparisons. Those are available to the public. And that's one of the services that we do. So I'd love to have you join, but if you don't, please come anyway and go to the website and look at that information. It is there for you as a public service.
Thank you, Dianna. We really appreciate that. I'm going to wrap up with our online audience. I'm going to turn it over to your in-person so you can answer any questions. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all online. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again. We will be back tomorrow for the Gut-Brain Connection. It's for Thursday, April 18th at 10 a.m. And next week, we'll be back in with the healthcare decisions. We've got navigating comfort care from palliative to hospice on Tuesday, April 23rd at 2 p.m. And then, so we hope to see you then. We also have space for an in-person program, which will be the Inside Story. And that will be featuring an end-of-life doula from Tucson End-of-Life Doulas. The program is on Wednesday, April 24th at 10 a.m. If you're interested in either of these, please give us a call at 520-324-1960. Have a great day.